Hi, good morning, and welcome to New Hampshire Business Review's Real Estate in the Age of Coronavirus discussion. I'm Ernesto Burden. I'm the publisher of New Hampshire Business Review, and I just wanted to take a minute and thank you all for coming and to introduce Jeff Feingold, New Hampshire Business Review's editor and the moderator of today's discussion. And he will introduce you to our panelists, who I also thank for being here. And I will get out of the way and let the conversation begin.
Thanks very much, Ernesto. Thank you all for attending this virtually. We're very excited about this panel, and we have a great panel made up of people who really know their business. So I'd like to introduce them first. The first one is Christian Stahlkamp. He's a senior broker at the Boulos Companies. He's based in Portsmouth, and for the past 10 years, he has focused his brokerage efforts in Southern New Hampshire, Southern Maine, and Northern Massachusetts, representing local, regional, and national buyers. And he currently serves as president of the New Hampshire Commercial Investment Board of Realtors, or NHCIBOR. And we have Bruce Bagdasarian, who's an attorney at Sheehan Finney and chairs the firm's real estate and finance practice group. He has a diverse commercial real estate lending and transactional practice with extensive experience representing lending institutions that connect to a construction, permanent, bridge, and mezzanine loans. And finally, we have Bill Norton, who should be a familiar face to people who read the New Hampshire Business Review. He's been a longtime regular contributor for the paper. He's the founder of Norton Asset Management and is a counselor of real estate or CRE and a facilities management administrator, FMA, who specializes in the management of the construction process from design through occupancy and has extensive experience in energy and facility management, as well as real estate brokerage. Anyway, gentlemen, thank you so much for coming with us, for coming here today, for being with us. I think I'd like to start with just kind of an overview from each of your perspectives. Basically, what does it look like out there right now? I mean, and you know, over the last six to 8 weeks, we've seen the devolution of so many parts of our economy, and real estate, especially in the commercial sector, it certainly hasn't been immune. But maybe I'll start with you, Bill, since I think I have an idea what you're going to be saying, but maybe others don't.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here today, sitting in my 3,000-foot office all by myself. These are trying times for real estate. Leasing and sales have pretty much ground to a halt. Some deals are processing, and we're figuring out how to record remotely, how to get documents endorsed and notarized and so forth. So it's a learning curve at that end. It's going to be a while, 4, 6, 10 weeks before we really know where we're at and what direction we're going, and whether this is a U, a V, or a hockey stick. We're clearly in recession, and we're probably in depression, meaning more than a couple of quarters of downward or negative growth. As for real estate, there's 5 sectors: multifamily, retail, office, industrial, and the mixed commercial, hospitality, et cetera. So they'll all react differently. I mean, hotel sector's devastated at the moment. I talked to a large owner here in New Hampshire yesterday, and he's not planning to open any of his facilities until after Labor Day. So the workforces there are going to be dramatically impacted. So it's challenging, but from a lease perspective, people will pay where they can. A number of our clients have told us that they've had tenants call and say they can't pay, or want to pay later, or can't pay for 3 months and will pay, add term on the back end. So those are individual discussions and negotiations as you go forward. The residential side's a little more complex, and I'll let others speak to that. So perhaps Bruce can weigh in on that one.
Yeah, so Bruce, would you like to take a shot at it?
Sure,
So
sure.
what things are looking like right now?
All right, thank you. We're seeing similar things. We're busy at the moment, but our pipeline of work has been affected, obviously, as everyone's, as the capital markets have frozen up. So, equity players are on the sidelines. The lenders, while they are doing some lending, are not lending like they used to. and favoring, I think, their best clients. And so the result is, deals that have not yet been signed up and deposits have gone hard, those deals, some of them are going sideways or being put on hold. And so it's affecting everyone. We're seeing, a lot of landlord-tenant issues, payment of rent. We have a client, as one example, that owns a retail center and got a notice from its large national retailers that they were going to stop paying rent, whereas the local mom and pop stores kept paying rent and we're looking for some kind of accommodation. So my guess is we're going to see a lot of that continue for this short period of time, where maybe the bigger players are taking a more aggressive stance. But it's a difficult situation with landlord-tenant issues. Most of these conversations, from what we're seeing, are about rent deferral, not rent forgiveness. It's too early, I think, to talk about forgiveness. Our advice to landlords, one of the pieces of advice is make sure whatever you agree with your tenants, you're also discussing it with your lenders. You don't want to make agreements and modify documents without having the permission of the lender, because it could be a violation. You want to be proactive. I mean, that's our advice to everybody. Be proactive. There are a lot of lender, because of the rent payment problems, you're having borrowers that have to speak to their lenders. We are seeing the banks are accommodating. The feds have encouraged them to be accommodating. And so, and including Fannie and Freddie for the multifamily properties, they're being accommodating. So there is some relief there, and we're seeing that happen. If you're an equity investor, we represent some, some of them are getting capital calls. We're seeing that happen because, there's anticipation of drop in revenues. And then we're seeing plenty of construction issues. As we all know, there are construction delays. And if you operate in some places like Boston or Cambridge, there's total work stoppages. So that's causing a lot of problems. And so people are looking at their force majeure clauses, looking at the specifics of the contracts to see what their rights are. And I believe, and what I'm hearing is that a lot of these are being worked out. I think contractors will be able to get, in some cases, more time. The question is whether they'll be entitled to more fees for extended overhead. So that's kind of what we're seeing right now.
Christian.
Yeah. So I'm currently out in the market, and what I'm seeing right now is the flow that was in the pipeline pre-COVID, that ended up, for the most part, hopefully you're able to get that closed. So if we look at our sales cycles, they're pretty long. Ground up stuff is going to take you a couple of years to be able to get through, even to a closing. So personally, I've been working on a bunch of deals and taking a number of years to get to this point, and we were able to successfully get past that hurdle to closing. So now we need to figure out, post-COVID, what's that going to look like? And currently it is challenging. We've seen a decrease in call volume out there. But addition to that, a little glimmer of hope, there are industries that are doing okay in this pandemic. I would look at some industrial, some retail, believe it or not. I just put 2 retail ground up developments under contract. And maybe they're hedging to say, hey, listen, I'm going to focus on this deal. Hopefully it's not going to be as bad. And by the time this all blows over, we'll be able to put up our retail center. But at the end of the day, if it's really bad, they'll probably just end up pulling out of the deal. But again, it's great to see that type of activity. Office has been pretty quiet in our market. Industrial has been pretty strong. So my primary focus is in the seacoast of New Hampshire, North Shore, Mass, and into Maine. In our market, we're more generalists. If we were working Boston, you'd be an office broker. We're more generalists, so we do get to see the activity that is out there. Tenants and buyers are cautious, and I think that at the end of the day, that's where we're going to have to figure out how to add value in bringing deals across the finish line. But So I look at it too as almost two phases. The first phase is trying to figure out how to get these businesses back to work. That's how do you modify your office space? How do you figure out how to get employees into the office? And then the second phase, I think you might take a look at is to say, all right, if we're trending down towards a recession, how do you right size your space? How are we going to go about making sure that you've got the right square footage for what may be a whole new business plan or business model for these companies? So it's going to be challenging times, but I think at the end of the day, we, as brokers, I always want to say get the right team together. That's your real estate team. That's somebody like Bruce on the attorney side. That's your CPA. That's your accountant. Get the right team to help you and guide you through these challenging times.
It's interesting because when this first started, when we first had this widespread stay-at-home orders in New Hampshire in particular, a lot of people started comparing things to what it was like in the Great Recession, or what it was like maybe in the late 80s, early 90s when we had basically a real estate depression. Are there any lessons to be learned from those previous downturns that we can apply here, or is this something that's just so, I guess, unique that we can't get any lessons from that? Do any of you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I'll start off. We just don't know because, structural recession, the Great Recession, over financialization and so forth, the markets closed down. We've been through that many times the last 50, 60 years. So there is some data points to go forward. But here we have to change. It's not just laying off 100,000 people and figuring out how many quarters it's going to take to bring them back into employment and what sectors are affected. This affects everybody. So as we talked earlier, what's the distancing rules? If you've got an open plan with 24 people working in a space and 6x6 cubicles or 5x5s, is that going to be allowed? Is that even prudent? What can you do about it? And so the work from home works for some people, not for everybody. And as an organization, there's two main questions. Is this kind of a speed bump that we can correct and get through by the end of 2020, or is this going to go on longer than that? There was a woman on a couple of weeks ago who's a professor at BU in Homeland Security. And at the time, she made a very solid statement, which was, look, we're going to lose 2 or 3 months here. So you're going to lose 2 or 3 months of revenue, but you're going to have 12 months of expenses. And that's kind of a best case scenario. So the concern going forward is, well, what if I lose 6 months of revenue? And how do I defer that out with my expenses? So that's the key here in terms of leases are for term. People will be forgiving to a point, but you will get to the fork in the road where a landlord's got to pay his mortgage lender. And if he's not getting revenue from his tenants, he's got to figure out how he's going to do that. And so I think it's new ground. It's not a typical what we saw before in the Great Recession or even the real estate lending, where basically in the 90s we just overbuilt and it took time for the economy to sort of move along and absorb that space. That's not the situation here today.
I would agree with Bill, and it's in the last downturn it was more a blend and extend, as we would say in the office market. This is something entirely different. It's a fundamental change in essence of how those companies are going back to work. Example of this is working with an office tenant. Pre-COVID, it was a 20,000 square foot office user. After COVID, they cut workforce in half, and they're all working remotely. I check in another week or two. We're trying to figure out this remote deal. I've got some systems and programs in place, and we'll see. Follow up again. Actually, this remote work is actually doing okay. The office requirement now, it's still out there, but it's not 20,000. It's 6,000 square feet, and it's a different type of model. Bringing people in for training, that type of model. And I think across the board there is some fundamental change going on with these businesses. Is going to affect their real estate. The flip side, though, I'd like to say is I miss my office. I miss the people that I work with. I look forward to getting back there. I think there's a lot of positive things when we all go back to the office in terms of collaboration, being able to bounce ideas off each other. And you know, that's what I miss. So that's what hopefully other companies are going to see that as well as a true benefit to office space when all this passes. But I think at the end of the day, unless people can feel safe and confident around the virus and in the everyday society, almost like the flu, we're going to continue to have a similar feel, you know, in the economy.
I agree. I think this recession is very different, and I agree with everything that's been said. I think the parallel between the other recessions is if you've never lived through a recession, living through a recession has creates certain insights, whether you're a lender, a broker, a lawyer, that are valuable insights. And you can't always assume everything is going to go along just fine. And when you draft documents, when you negotiate documents, you have to take into account that there are black swan events, there are recessions, prices don't just keep going up and up, and people need to be smart and take into account that there are dips. So living through one of these is not fun, but I think once you get to the other side, you have a lot more perspective, and you also see how people respond during these recessions, whether it's your borrowers, your tenants, your landlords. When things are tough, some people act differently than otherwise. So it's there are a lot of parallels, but this one is quite unique.
Yeah, first of all, before I go on, I want us to remind the people who are our attendees that we welcome you to ask your questions. There's a place where you can submit questions that for our panelists, because we only have them for about 45 more minutes, so we don't want to take this time, let this time go to waste. But I do have a question here that I find very interesting. I think I'll give it to you first, Bruce. Do you think what we've seen? You mentioned all the things about the pressures on tenants and on landlords. The question here has to do you see if any changes will be coming in the bankruptcy laws because of this?
Changes in the bankruptcy laws?
Yeah.
I'm not a bankruptcy lawyer. There have been recent changes to try to facilitate bankruptcies for smaller companies. I'm not aware of any changes that are coming as a result of this. I haven't heard any conversation about that. I'm not sure what the question, what's behind the question, but clearly, tenants, this is a unprecedented situation for tenants where you go from being, busy as can be to absolutely still and, put out of business effectively for some tenants, retailers, hospitality. So maybe that's the question: is should there be special protections for them? I don't really have anything in my crystal ball about that.
Anybody else want to try that one, or?
Well, again, we don't know whether this thing's going to kind of clear itself up by the end of the summer or the end of the year or 2 years from now. So that dynamic is going to drive it. So we talk about landlords and tenants and buying and selling of property. Bricks and mortar is a belly-to-belly business. And to Christian's point earlier, it's hard to do it kind of remotely. It's relationships and so forth, and reading body language has a lot to do with it. A lot of money involved in buying buildings at $200 a foot. The key here that we talk about landlords and tenants. What about their employees? How are they affected? Are they able, are they willing to do certain things? Are they able to do certain things? Do they have family commitments and other things that will pull them away from being able to adapt to the new? Here in New Hampshire, huge tourist economy, hospitality economy, consumer economy, those have all been clobbered. So what are the impacts of that on the rest of us, the general business population? I mean, if the banks are getting clobbered because of consumer loans and unpaid mortgages and so forth, how does that impact their willingness to do commercial lending? It's a pretty big storm out there.
Speaking of that, I have another question here. It says that I think lenders are a bit tighter with lending money now, but what about existing lines of credit? Do you foresee lenders potentially freezing those? Does any of you have a thought on that?
We've seen a couple of our clients who've actually drawn down their lines in anticipation that that might become the case. The Fed's going to print a pile of money here. I think the local banks will be getting federal funds at zero. So interest rates, ironically, could actually drop. And I was speaking with a development client the other day who was getting ready to line up. He thinks he's going to hold back. He thinks he can get a lower rate. The banks have got to put the money on the street. And the PPP and the other small business loans, the interest is de minimis. It's the fee that they're getting for administering it that'll bring some cash in the door, but that's not going to support their overheads and so forth. So I think the concern will be more in terms of private equity and others coming in. Are they going to want to invest in real estate versus some other opportunities? It's just a foggy horizon out there as to what's really going on and where the opportunities are going to be.
Yeah, I think it's going to be handled on a case-by-case basis, probably. I guess it depends on what covenants are in those loan documents as to what the lenders can do. And it really depends on the situation with that particular borrower. And I think a lot of things are being handled on a case-by-case basis. So, if there's if a lender has a concern about the stability of a borrower and it has the ability to freeze that line of credit, then I don't think it would be unexpected if that lender did do that. So I think it's a case-by-case basis.
But Bruce, they can't just do that arbitrarily, but they can do it by going into the loan covenants and the underlying status of the business. So if you're a hotelier and suddenly you've got 10% occupancy, you're busting your loan covenants because your cash flow isn't there for the debt coverage. So the bank has to do what they want to do. But as we saw in the 90s, late 80s, 90s, the real estate recession, it's not always in the bank's best interest to follow the letter of the law to the dotting the I's and crossing. They don't want to take a lot of this property in. They don't want to get in the ORE business, and then particularly some sectors. If you're a lender, you don't want to end up owning 20 restaurants that aren't open. I mean, it's a conundrum for them.
Yeah, I'd say I agree with you. It would have to be a covenant that would have to be tripped in order for them to do that. So they can't just willy-nilly freeze a line of credit. And I agree, banks don't want to own real estate. Your typical commercial lender, will work with the borrowers. There are certain debt funds and high interest lenders that may have a different agenda, but your typical banks and insurance companies, they're not looking to own real estate. I think they're looking for full transparency. They're looking for you to come to them and be transparent. And you'll get, in my experience, you'll get the best treatment that way. You won't get great treatment by going silent and failing to communicate.
Well, one of the keys is capitalization required. So banks rate their loan portfolio by risk, and the regulators help them do that and come in and audit it periodically and so forth. So as property values deteriorate and the ability of the borrowers to pay deteriorates, the banks have to have more capital on hand for those the loan portfolio that's weakening. So that's going to be a stressor for the banks going forward. So maybe there's some relief there from the regulators and from Washington to say, well, we put that stuff in Dodd-Frank subsequently, but maybe we need to give some forbearance on that or postpone some of that.
Yeah, the Feds right now, the Feds have encouraged the banks to work with borrowers, and they have said that if you restructure your loans, they will not be treated like these debt restructurings, where the banks have to, they effectively get penalized. So I think the federal regulators have said, we're not going to penalize you for working with your borrowers. We encourage you to do it. You're not going to have to reappraise, and we're not going to put you through all these hoops to set aside money and treat you like we have before this recession.
Okay, I have this question that's pretty much related to this. It's from a restaurant owner with a landlord who won't budge. Can you talk about any relief options for small landlords who have small business tenants? Deferral of rent, as you mentioned, is not a viable option for small restaurants who won't come anywhere near making up the lost revenue. Are there any alternative options for the landlords? Otherwise, they will end up with a lot of empty spaces, especially in places like Portsmouth with so many small restaurants and stores. Any of you guys have thoughts on that?
I mean, I think that's one of the big questions is will rent deferral, is rent deferral workable for some of these tenants? And again, it's a case by case basis. I think a lot of landlords are going to have to look at it hard, and they're going to have to do it, as I mentioned earlier, I think they need to speak to their lenders as well. So they need to come up with a game plan, just like the tenants do. If I'm the landlord, I certainly want my tenant. I want to know that my tenant is doing everything the tenant can do to take advantage of the PPP money, the disaster recovery money, whatever money is out there to help prop up that tenant. And I assume that tenants are doing it, but I do hear stories about people having not gotten around to it because for whatever reason, and they're not getting their PPP money. And I'm scratching my head saying, I wish that person, that business had gotten in the queue earlier because they got left out. So if I'm the landlord, I'm going to want to have that conversation about what are you doing? You need help? But it is a case by case basis. If it means that the deferral is just not workable, I think a lot of landlords are saying, fine, we'll take these 3 months or however many months it is, and we're going to put that on the back end of your lease or spread it out over time. I think, again, case by case basis. I think you have to decide whether, as a tenant, whether you're willing to take on a total deferral. As a landlord, you got to decide how far you're willing to push if they refuse. And it really depends on the market you're in, what your options are for other tenants. It is a relationship, and I think a lot of people are trying to work with each other, and hopefully a lot of these work out. Will there be rent forgiveness? I think we don't know where this is going, and so I think a lot of landlords are saying we're not forgiving anything right now. We're deferring, and then if the tenant doesn't work out for a tenant, and then things are not rebounding, then it's maybe another discussion about forgiveness. But I think it's too early for a lot of landlords to talk about forgiveness.
And to Bruce's point, the restaurant tenants that I've been working with, a lot of the recommendations to say, hey, communication, reaching out to your landlord, having that conversation. If you haven't spoken to the landlord by now, I'd be concerned. You should be reaching out to them. This is the time period where you're going to develop a relationship with your landlord that will last for years. And having that communication, sitting down, or I guess now everybody, we're doing that on Zoom or on the phone. But explaining, hey, where's your business? Some restaurants, talking to one client, some restaurants, they had a good takeout program in place. They're getting by. Obviously, they had to shrink their employees, but they're doing roughly 50% of the business that they used to. Another higher end restaurant, that same client, they're only doing 20%. So they're having a more challenge to be able to pivot to takeout. So in this conversation, it's said to the landlord, hey, I've got takeout going on. In everything indicates that when we go back and live, it's not going to be flipping a light switch, as everybody says. That restaurant's going to have a challenge with social distancing. So it's figuring out a plan with that landlord, and hopefully, working with that landlord to structure something that works for both parties. Because There's no sense giving 3 months rent when they're not going to be able to hit those numbers when they open up the restaurant and there's only 50% of their seats there. So at the end of the day, if we can communicate, I think that's going to be the best way forward.
Well, we talked about this. You guys have talked about this earlier, and I think about just how this whole environment is just changing everything. And there's a question here that's really interesting to me. I mean, it's like, do you think that because of the pandemic, that there'll be more of a migration from the urban centers, which we've seen over the last decade, certainly, if not longer, to rural areas, and how that might affect the real estate market in the future? Do you guys have any thoughts on that?
Well, people may want to get out of New York, but where are they going to work? There's got to be jobs for them to come to. We're seeing in the North Country. Well, there's some of that, but we get to our connectivity issues. So people are coming to their summer homes. Are they going to stay there? Are they going to try to sell their properties? If it's a significant wave, and 50,000 condos in New York City come on the market at once, the market's going to plummet. They're not going to be able to sell them. So what's the value? I mean, people may want to get out of the cities, but where are they going to go? The growth has been in the Sun Belt, not in the cold, dark north. So it'll be an interesting demographic and geographic analysis as to how this migration might actually happen.
Here's another question. It's about from the residential side. I am seeing many tenant applications where people have been furloughed on unemployment from the state as well as federally. Some of these people may actually be making more money in COVID than in a normal time. Coupled with the state preventing evictions, do you believe that landlords should be choosing vacancy or risking instead of risking new furloughed tenants? Anybody have any thoughts on that?
Well, the federal stimulus, the extra $600 a week, that's not in perpetuity. That's going to burn off here. And so we're really in two phases. The immediate response to this, let's say getting through the summer, and then we catch our breath, we go to inning number 2 and say, well, where are we? What's the rest of the year look like? What's the next 6 months look like? Again, with our tourist economy and consumer economy and so forth, this could be a hockey stick coming out the other end. It could be quite a while before we get a volume back in the economy and the ability to refloat things. And at the professional level, there's a lot of us that have savings and so forth, but there's a large piece of our population that are, we're living month to month, week to week, as it was, and they've got no safety net. This is going to be a hard slog for them.
Yeah, interesting that there's a question here from someone who's a landlord, a small landlord, and he's thinking that he's like 2 to 4 family houses, and his concern is that with the way things are going now, that new tenants, that long-term residents may not want to go back to the way it was, and he's worried about if there's tenants leave, worried about verifying incoming tenants coming in. Is that I guess that's a concern. I mean, that's really, if you think about it, that's a major concern going forward. Is you've had maybe some long-term tenants, they leave, and then in come new ones, and there's no way of knowing. It's not the same kind of verification process right now, is there? If you are bringing in new tenants.
Well, there's uncertainty for everybody. A rising tide floats all boats. So in the residential side here in New Hampshire for the last 5 years, it's been a landlord's market. Rents have gone up. They love one-year leases and 1-year extensions because they can move the rents up. Unlike an office lease or industrial lease might be 3, 5, 10 years in term with the rates already fixed. But there's going to be a lot of unknowns going forward, and whether this economy bounces back and stays on a regular trajectory, or are we going to have some dips and doodles going forward that are going to impact employment? we're coming out of a period of record low unemployment, full employment, and that's going to change. And the challenge, I think, is the mismatch between those who are unemployed and the skill sets that employers are looking for. So there's going to be people unemployed. Number of unemployed is going to increase, but are those people eligible, and do they complement the needs of the manufacturers and the other sectors that are trying to hire them? That comes, if you're a landlord, do I want to rent to Jeff and as a publisher on a magazine?
Hey, thanks a lot.
Well, pick the newspaper. I live in Concord. The Monitor's down to about, and they've gotten some help and so forth. But is that advertising going to come back? I mean, just to take it one step further, the structural change is going to be very interesting. Christian mentioned restaurants going to takeout. I can see some circumstances where some says, my revenues are down 15%, but my expenses are down 25%. Maybe I don't want to go back to the old business model. Maybe I'm going to pare this down and simplify it a little bit, and maybe it's going to be a takeout and quasi catering function going forward. That's a simple example, but that we talked earlier, Bruce, about law firms and working remotely and so forth. At a professional level, you can do that, but people are going to learn pretty quickly. We didn't necessarily need 4 administrative people sitting outside our offices to help with this and that and the other thing. So the longer this goes on, the more ingrained are going to be the changes, which are going to further impact the way people do business going forward. The other side of the coin is, if we bounce out of this too quickly, this pandemic, we're not going to learn the lessons, and we're going to be at risk again. I mean, this virus is not a one-off. 7.5 billion people on the earth, we're stepping on our shadows. This is going to happen again with globalization and globalism, where it's free borders and what have you. You can't stop this. So people need to think long and hard about what the probabilities are of this coming back in some form, whether it's next year or 3 years from now or 5 years from now. It's a lot to think about. And with the bottom falling out, it's hard to kind of get your feet under you to really clear your head to try to get up to a 30,000 foot level and see the big picture.
Here's another one that's interesting, because I live in Manchester, and about a block away is a hotel going up in the Mill Yard. And then there's another hotel going up, new hotel going up near the SNU Arena. And I always had my thoughts, my questions about it, a year ago, 2 new hotels going up in Manchester. But now, with the situation we have now, the question is related to this. How will the hotel business be affected, both for existing hotels and those in the planning and construction phases? Will tourists visit hotels the way they did in the recent past?
Well, I think, unfortunately, hospitality, which has taken the biggest hit, is probably going to be a while before people are comfortable, traveling and staying in rooms that other people have stayed in the night before. And I got to think, I know there's going to be probably a slow return to traveling and a slow return to using hotels. I got to think it's probably going to be a long period before we go back to normal. I guess the question, for existing hotels, they're suffering. If they're highly leveraged, it's going to be a difficult situation between them and their lenders. If you're under construction, I guess the question is, can you switch to a multifamily use from your hotel design to your multifamily? Maybe that's not possible. But it's a thought. So I think if you're under construction, you know, you just plow forward because hopefully we come out on the other end and we're okay. Depends on where you are in construction. I mean, how far away are we from a vaccine? I think when a vaccine comes out and the general public is feeling safe, you know, I think it's going to come roaring back. But until then, I think it's going to be tough for hospitality. And so if you've got a project that it's not going to be completed for another year, I think you just plow forward. If you're already existing and you're hurting, it's a tough situation.
All right, we talked about this a little bit, but I think maybe we get a little more deeper into it because I had a couple of questions right now on this. How will this work from home situation we're all in, how is that going to affect the use of spaces? I'm thinking specifically office space, but there are other spaces as well that will be affected by this. You know, I know that you've mentioned some stuff before, but maybe you could, you know, expound on your thoughts a little bit more.
Yeah, it's interesting. I guess I could take this one in terms of working from home and also having an office environment. I closed this past month on a 20,000 square foot office deal. Their density was 101 person per 150 square feet, where our average we would see there is probably 250 square feet per person. So day one, when they open up those doors, that's going to have to change because their model was to, you know, obviously pack people into the space, more collaborative, more open space, which was the trend. So as we're working from home, what we're hearing is a lot of groups are actually looking to stagger their employees coming in the way that they would set up the office, and then going to, you know, other types of systems and procedures to coordinate meetings. So it definitely will be a change out there, and companies have had to pivot to try to figure out the best plan of attack.
Yeah. Did we lose Bill there? It looks like we did. Anyway, do you think though, in terms of office space, just in general, I mean, you think people will be going forward, there'll be as much of a need for as much space as people currently have, or are they going to be reviewing what kind of space they have?
Yeah, I think. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Bruce.
No, Bruce, go ahead. Oh,
I think he's on mute.
We lost Bruce. I think he's on mute.
I'm back.
Are you there? Oh, there you go.
You know, I think a lot of people are wanting to get back to their offices, and so I think I don't think it's going to affect things dramatically, but certainly this has taught a lot of people how to work remotely, and so there probably will be more remote work, and so I think there's a chance that maybe there'll be a little less need, and there'll be some new ways of operating with less space. But I think this also reminds us how much we do like to gather in groups, and a lot of people are missing their work environments, and we're missing their work colleagues, and looking for some separation between them and home, because when you're home, if you've got kids, it's not an easy situation to get your work done, you know, there are other challenges at home, technology challenges, et cetera. So people are missing their work environments, a lot of people. And I don't think there's going to be any dramatic shift, but there could be some.
Yeah, I'm thinking the question I think is more to do with not that there'll be no office space, but there'll be reduced office space. You know, a company that might have had space for 20 workers might say, well, we just need 10 because we could do some kind of we don't need as much. We could have like a staggered, you know, kind of work week. Is that something you see on the horizon, maybe Christian or Bill or Bruce?
Yeah, I think some people are trying to pivot that way. I think you lose a lot when you don't have the collaboration personally.
Yeah.
For our office market that we see in the Seacoast, it's been really tight. So is the industrial market. So I think that we're going to find more options for tenants out there, which is good because as the leases come up and for renewal, they'll be able to then right size into their space. And, you know, down the road, 6 months, 8 months, I think these businesses are going to have a better perspective in terms of what that actual footprint and floor plate should look like, and then be able to go into a space that's now right for whatever that business is, because it's going to change. That revenue model, that's all changing right now. So that tenant needs to pivot into renewal or into a lease modification into the right size of the space. And figuring out the past 4 weeks, 6 weeks, companies are going to see, can they really do this remotely? Or most businesses, or I would see, would want to get back to the office in a similar style or footprint, but maybe 6 feet of distance, right?
Yeah. Well, Bill, you had something to say?
Yeah, I think another piece is we chatted a little bit in prepping for this session is that some workers are going to adapt to working remotely, and some are not going to adapt as well. And that's the new norm and part of the business model going forward. That's going to have employers think about who they want to hire and who's productive in this new hybrid, if you will. If you're, come to the office on Tuesdays and Thursdays and work from home Monday, Tuesdays, and Wednesdays, or Wednesday and Friday. So it's going to put some pressure on individual employees to figure out, A, can they do this new model, and B, do they want to do this model?
Yeah, it occurs to me, Bill, you mentioned this earlier while we were prepping, and there are some industries where they might need to have more space. You mentioned call centers, and it occurs to me also manufacturers might have to, because they'll have to have more space between workers, perhaps. And could you just discuss what you were talking about call centers in particular?
Well, call centers are a very dense population, and in the real estate world, it drives two things: the square footage of space. They use a lot of power because they have phones and computers going and need a lot of air conditioning, but they also drive a big parking footprint. They often ask for 8 or 10 spaces per 1,000 square feet, which is double what a retail mall would have. That's because their people are shoved into 3 foot by 5 foot cubicles or 3 foot by 4 foot cubicles, dozens of them, if not hundreds of them. That clearly does not meet the social distancing requirements that we're seeing. And in fact, the other day or yesterday, I think that there's question whether 6 foot is a reasonable standard or it needs to be greater than that. So that could be changing as well. So in the current environment, if you were going back and ordered to maintain the 6 foot distancing, you probably have to vacate every other cube in your current configuration. So if you had 100 people there, maybe you could accommodate 40 or 50 on site. Are the others able to work remotely? Or do you have to put up another site to do that? Or do you have to double your space where you are? All interesting questions. There's one example on the sort of office population side, or if you're doing customer service for a company, 8 to 4:30 or 8 to 6 o'clock Eastern, a second shift doesn't do you a lot of good. I think that some manufacturers, I'm thinking Pitco up in Concord, that they'll go to a second or third shift as a way to spread out their employees and meet the standards of the distancing that are likely coming forward. But not every manufacturer can do that.
Yeah, to Bill's point, looking at Jeff, looking at industrial, I think we're going to see an increased demand in industrial for those groups. When they look at their supply chain, they're going to want that closer to home. So they're probably going to have more inventory on hand in the event that something like this happens again, or total reorganization of the supply chain. And what we're seeing right now on the industrial side, I'm working on a 100,000 square foot industrial building. We're seeing a lot of calls. It is not, the phones have continued to ring on that property. So it hasn't shut off. The group's definitely looking to grow and expand. And it's those groups that are doing, very well in this type of environment.
Yeah, here's a question about, because we really haven't touched it too much, about retail. Someone wrote in saying, I heard Simon was opening some more malls. I hadn't heard that one. I know they're opening malls around the country in certain states where they're relaxing the stay-at-home orders. But what about the outlook for retail? You know, we've talked about offices and other things. So what does retail look like going into the future from your perspectives?
I'll jump in first. I'm just reading about the mall at Rockingham up in Salem, or down in Salem. 800,000 feet of retail space. They have presumably leases or commitments from some very large national tenants. The question is, are they going to rethink that going forward? The space hasn't been built yet. So Bruce might comment on what those obligations really are. I mean, as a landlord, you don't want to build a building 100,000 feet for a tenant that doesn't have a successful prospect going forward financially. So those discussions would be, before I break ground and commit that kind of money, is Macy's or Pottery Barn or whoever it is, are they still viable in a bricks and mortar environment?
I think those retail groups that had good online presence are going to do okay. Those that didn't, probably not. And also, unfortunately, those that were highly leveraged are going to have troubles, getting through this. But also that also is their model at some point. Some of these private equity groups just want to leverage to the hills and turn around. And I think that's where those groups are going to get trouble. I think Neiman Marcus was one that we all read about. So it'll be interesting. I think retail will change. But we're creatures of habit. I think we're going to want to get out there once this thing's done. I recently did a retail brewery deal, and they're excited to open up.
I think one thing that has not suffered are liquor sales, from what I understand.
True.
Yeah.
So there, it's interesting. If you look forward, I was on a webinar the other day, and they polled everybody, and they said, if restaurants opened up in July, how many of you would be comfortable going back? The majority said, it was either June or July, the majority said they were not comfortable. And so there's going to have to be this period where people start getting comfortable going back to restaurants, going back to malls, being in close proximity with other people. And I think it's going to be a slow readjustment. And again, until that vaccine comes out, people are going to be nervous. So it's going to be, I think, a trying time, and it's going to be a slow return. Theaters, restaurants, brick and mortar retail, it's going to be probably a slow slog. I think if you're building a mall, and you're trying to find anchors, grocery anchors have become very popular. Now they're going to be even more popular. So, it's hard to bet on. You got to be smart about betting on which retail, and retail has kind of reinvented itself over the last number of years, and that's going to continue to happen, I think.
There's an interesting thing.
I was at Lowe's the other day, and a Saturday, and they had us queued up outside. They were doing a head count for how many people could go in the store. So after about 20 minutes, I said, I don't really need that widget. So how's that going to impact sales volume and ultimately their ability to pay rent? On the other hand, behavior-wise, does it tell me that maybe I should just order the widget online and it'll show up in 48 hours? So I think the push towards the online sales is really going to gain traction through this event.
So I would also think, by extension, I think that also means that there'll be more of a need for warehouse and distribution space as we move forward. You've seen that already in New Hampshire, and I think we'd see more of that. Am I making this up, or is that something that's real?
I would agree. I mean, our industrial market's been tight, and it's been tight for a long time. For the past 5-7 years, the Seacoast has seen probably a 5% vacancy rate. So if you think about all the buildings out there in the industrial world, you're going to have a functionally obsolete building, one that's really low clear height, meaning ceiling heights and lots of columns. And that'll be a 100,000 square foot building. You take that out of the 5.5%, you're hovering around 3.5. So it's been a very tight market for industrial. So the challenge is bringing new product into the market has been the cost of construction, and that has been higher in terms of what tenants have been willing to pay. So financing for new construction has been a challenge. So if this opens up, the door for new construction on industrial, that would be great. Our market here in the Seacoast needs it. Our office market, it's tight as well. I don't think you're going to see, maybe new office unless build to suit. But I think at the end of the day, in this market in the Seacoast, having more product will help us.
Well, and Christian, just a clarification, you say industrial, we're talking high bay buildings, 16, 20, 30 feet tall. Much of that demand in the last 5 years in New Hampshire has been warehouse distribution. In Hooksett, former BJ's became a distribution point for Amazon Prime, and then ultimately they actually stock it. So I think they have 14,000 products there in Hooksett fulfillment as a fulfillment center, and their algorithms tell them what are the 14,000 things that are most in demand, serving New Hampshire and southern Maine and central Vermont. So Amazon knows at 3 o'clock in the morning what you're going to buy before you even wake up. I mean, that's coming as we move forward. But to Christian's point, those buildings are going to get bigger and taller, and they're going to have computers and robots and so forth pulling inventory. And they don't hire a lot of people.
It's a lot easier to do social distancing in an industrial building than it is a packed office environment, for sure.
That's for sure. Since we're running out of some time here, I thought I'd wrap up with this one question that came from a couple of people. And that is, what kind of advice would you give to a new agent entering the market? It's, real estate, whether it's commercial or residential, I guess.
It's a great question. I cut my teeth in the last, downturn, and that's on the phone, talking to as many people as you can, and really digging into it. This market for the past 10 years for commercial, it's been strong. In downturns, that's where you've got to really work, and that's where I cut my teeth and started. They gave me a phone and said, "You need your real estate license." So, all right, that's what I got, and then hit the ground running. But just digging into it every day.
I know a lot of people start their businesses in a downturn, and they're much better equipped to survive downturns as they go ahead because of that. But,
yeah.
Anyway, I wanted to thank all three of you guys for this. I think this was a really informative webinar. Christian Stahlkamp from the Bulos Company, Bill Norton from Norton Asset Management, and Bruce Bagdasarian of Sheehan Finney. And I also wanted to say that we obviously didn't get to any discussion of really the residential market. And what we're doing is planning another webinar in 2 weeks with a panel discussing solely residential, because real estate is such a big topic in New Hampshire, and it's obviously one of the major economic engines of the state. So we'll be discussing residential real estate in the age of coronavirus in 2 weeks. Thursday, that is May 9th, I believe. And we hope you can sign up for that if you're interested. And once again, Bruce, Christian, and Bill, I want to thank you all, and all the people who attended. Thanks so much for tuning in.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Thank you.